And we are live. Okay, so here we are with our UK Recruiter Christmas Special 2016. I'm joined by Stephen O'Donnell.
Hello.
And Matt Burney.
Hey.
Hello. And we are talking about various things which are topics which have come up in 2016, which may or may not be big issues for the recruitment industry, and then maybe some ideas of things which people are talking about in their predictions for 2017. There is a live chat on YouTube, so if you're using the YouTube link, which we're sharing out, you can actually add comments, which I will track as we go through. So I've got a list of 12-ish things.
Are you checking it twice as well?
I nearly said that. I didn't check it twice. No, and do you know what? I should have checked it twice before I sent it to you, because I think there was quite a few typos in it. So I've got a list of things that we're going to chat through, and I'm going to let you guys do most of the talking. So if I bring up the topics, and we'll go through them one by one. And the first one is something I don't think you two particularly agree on, which should make it quite interesting, and that is the topic of, and I hate this term, and I think you probably both hate this term, the gig economy, mobile workforce, flexible working. Is it something real? Is it just temping? Should recruiters be really looking at it for 2017? Go on,
Stephen. I know you feel passionately about this.
Well, the gig economy is a terrible name, but everything gets a terrible name until we find a better one. Essentially, it's just to do with the frequency with which people are working. Either they have several jobs on the go at once, or none, or they work off and on as and when either suits them or suits employers. So the idea that everyone has a 9-to-5, Monday to Friday job for 20 years is not entirely obsolete, because there are still a lot of people out there who do it. But of the people who change jobs frequently or more frequently, then the frequency has stepped up in the past couple of years. Since the recession bit and then faded away, people are switching jobs on a more regular basis, and an employer, when they see a CV of someone who's changed jobs, every 3 or 6 months for the past few years, they're not looking at it askance in the same way as they used to do. They're looking at the benefits of that. Now, I'm not saying it's always going to be benefits, but it's much more normal now. Some people are doing it on purpose. Some people are doing it, frankly, because there isn't a permanent job to be had. They would like to be Monday to Friday, 9-to-5, but it's just not available. And certainly in certain types of work, it's almost impossible to get a permanent full-time job, for example. It's maybe an extreme example. So my son Keir works in film and TV, and there's no such thing, unless you're working at the BBC, as a permanent job. You work from project to project, and you'll have periods in between of not doing anything at all.
Well, going back to our point about this, my belief is this is not vastly dissimilar to what people have already done in the temping space. When I worked in high street recruitment all those many years ago, we had people who would do exactly the same thing. They would be people who'd say, yeah, I'll go and work in an office during the day, but I'll go and do a bit of chefing on the weekend, or I'll go and work in a factory, I'll go and do whatever, because they actually just enjoyed doing different types of work. I don't actually think this has changed demonstrably. I think much like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about now, much like a lot of the parlance that's being used about things being new, these aren't actually new things. They're just things that we're more openly talking about people doing as a set of behaviours. It's like saying, this is the trait of millennials. Well, no, it's not. It's people that have been around for a long time. So I think, you're absolutely right. The gig economy is a absolutely terrible name for it, because it doesn't really mean anything. I think if we're giving people the opportunity to do things, we're being more open and honest about the fact that people have always done this. What we're really seeing is more the question of, look, if we give you the opportunity to do something, do you want to do it? And the answer is usually yes. And that's what we see with most sort of behaviours around, these new ways of thinking about work and these new ways of working. People have always done it, but perhaps more people are adopting it because we're a bit more open and honest about the fact that you can go and do it.
I wish I could quote the stats, but I think the proportion of people who are doing it by choice or compulsion is much greater than before. So I
wouldn't dispute that at all. Yeah, I think you're probably right there.
And that's where the opportunity for recruiters comes in, is to either corporate recruiters or corporates or agencies, is to recognise that this is something they could take advantage of. So for agencies, if you are just focused on perm placements, then you're missing a large section of potential recruitment revenue. Mm-hmm. And if you are a corporate who doesn't feel that they can have a flexible workforce, you're missing out on people who could be really great workers for you. So is that what the relevance to recruitment? Not that it is temping, but there's more of it. Is the relevance that there was more of it?
One thing that's always true from a recruitment agency point of view is that a static market, and having been around for a long time, as Matt has, we know that when there's a static market, when there's very little circulation of people from one job to another, then that's terrible for recruitment companies. But when there's either a big demand for candidates or for jobs, on either side, when there's movement, then agencies are much in demand, and what agencies can do is fill that space and make those matches. So in the move to what we might be calling the gig economy now, because there's a lot more circulation, there's a lot more for recruitment agencies to do, despite the fact that a lot of the work that agencies do is beginning to be automated out, or is expected to be automated out in the future. If there's going to be much more frequency of change, then that's going to be very much a factor. And apps and systems like, say, Temp Buddy or Job Today, Job and Talent, or any number of these, those are looking to somehow manage that process, that frequently changing jobs process, so that candidates can pick up contracts as quickly and efficiently as possible.
I think there's a flip side to all of this, in that I think we're all agreed that this is probably not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I think the peril for candidates comes when they decide they don't want to do that anymore, and they want to go and work for an employer. Because Louise and I touched on this earlier, actually. I've still seen some really horrific examples of companies that are turning around and saying, well, yeah, but we still think you're a job hopper. And the fact that the term job hopper still exists today shows that recruitment hasn't moved on. That's something that was taught to me 20 odd years ago when I first started on high street recruitment.
Yeah,
it's not a real term, but I think it sort of speaks to a lack of education about what the world is doing. And I always worry when we have conversations like this, and when I go off to conferences and events, and I go off to more than most, that we are sort of in that filter bubble of we are the educated, we are the people that understand what's really going on, whereas actually those cold-faced recruiters are still thinking it's 1996, and still treating candidates pretty poorly as a result of making what is probably for them a really good, really solid life choice, and actually probably quite a good career choice, as long as they're being treated in the right way when they enter into the recruitment cycle.
There's a period that we have to go through, though, as we're getting used to frequently changing jobs. Going back as long as you can remember, when people are working as temps, when temps work through an agency, say going back to even just a temporary office worker being paid a relatively low wage in a permanent job, but being paid salary plus whatever when they're working on a temporary basis because they're filling a temporary need. So there would be a bonus for that, and the additional premium that's paid to that person is basically taking account of the fact that they've been available at short notice, and there would be periods of unemployment in between postings and contracts and so on. What's happening now in this frequently changing gig economy, or working on projects here and there with gaps in between, is that people are not billing, or people are not being paid that premium to cover for the blank times when you're not charging anyone, where you're not being paid anything. So if you're working maybe only 9 months out of the year, you really need to be charging or being paid a year's worth of salary for that, because the 3 months that you're not being paid, you still have mortgage and all the other bills that go along with it.
And globalization is the big threat to that as well. Sorry, Louise, but if I've used I'm trying to think, Upwork before. I've hired people through Upwork, and generally speaking, I could hire somebody who's in Brighton, just down the road from me, or I could hire somebody in London or in Sheffield or whatever, and have an expectation of quality. But then I can go and look at the people I've worked with in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and India who can give me exactly the same quality and will do it for, in one instance, I had somebody do a project for me for $3 an hour. And the nearest that I got as a UK quote was £25. And the job was done fantastically well. And my recommendation for the person I worked with is incredibly high. So yeah, you're right. That we should be absolutely trying to compensate people for those lean times, but globalization means that we kind of can't anymore. It's not practical to do that. It's like anything, automation. It's like new technologies. It's there to advance business, and business is there to make money.
But not all are we remotely on the other end of the planet.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not necessarily saying that applies as a catch-all for everything, but there's a vast majority of the sort of work we talk about as being in this gig economy kind of quote unquote framework that a lot of people talk about is stuff that can be outsourced to other countries.
Yeah.
And that's almost like having people on 0-hour contracts with more than one employer.
Yeah.
Because basically, it's bad enough being on a 0-hour contract with one employer, Sports Direct, but at least you are going to hopefully do work for them. This is temping, but getting paid that very low wage and not having any additional cover. Contractors, like you were saying, would traditionally get paid an awful lot more. And I wonder whether we'll see it in things like teaching. So teaching, supply bank teachers would traditionally get paid more than a standard teacher. But is this going to then move into that part of the economy where they also get paid that same hourly rate that a permanent person would, and yes, you've got the flexibility, but no, you don't have the security.
And what happens is the market factors they conspire to depress salary levels. So salary levels come down to the lowest common denominator and don't rise based on someone being scarce. When you were talking about 0-hour contracts, typically the conditions, and I don't know, has it been ruled illegal yet? But the conditions were that working on a 0-hour contract, you promise to be available. And if you've got two companies you're working on 0-hour contracts, you can't be available guaranteed for both of them, because if you're working for one, you're not available for the other.
No, but then you're just temping, which means that you're still on a 0-hour contract, but without any security.
And I think you made a really valid point about things like teaching. And it kind of leads on to some of the other stuff that we were going to talk about today. But when you think about things like automation and the areas that automation is going to go into, it's really interesting to talk to people who know a reasonable amount about automation and artificial intelligence and what work's going to look like. Teaching is actually one of those things that is potentially under threat. And it's one of those industries where people kind of go, well, no, it can't be, because we understand it's X. Well, it's not. And the benefits of being able to do these things remotely and do them incredibly low cost, and where you would have for example 10 teachers in one school, you could have one teacher, and you could have a series of automated tools that will allow children to learn at an accelerated rate. We really have to start thinking about not just the idea of the gig economy, but actually what does the future of work look like? It's a really interesting place we're at the moment, and I think my overarching worry for 2017, as we're talking about an end of year roundup, is that the vast majority of companies that I speak with have not considered what automation looks like. They haven't actually said.
Come on to that now, actually, Matt. Let's talk about that now, because one of my comments about automation was that I think that 2016, 2015, we've talked about big data, and I think that terminology is being replaced by the idea of AI, robotics, automation. And I think they're just confusing buzzwords for people. I know they mean something. I know big data means something, but I just think that we're managing to make something far more complex and far more scary than it really is, and doesn't sound very exciting.
Well, if I can give you a real life example, number 2 son dropped in at my office earlier today, and he wasn't going into university today. There's a lecture this afternoon, and it's going to be broadcast on the university's intranet, and it can replay anytime you like, so he doesn't need to go along to it. But of course, that means that in theory, and the exact same when he was in St Andrews, he hardly attended any lectures, but had them all online to his laptop and would watch them through the night whenever it suited him. You could have a teacher giving a lesson to as many as you like, not being restricted to 30 kids in a class. So the delivery of the materials could be done to as many people as you like. But of course, on the one-to-one with kids, you would then need to have more teachers for that. But a big chunk of the delivery of the content can be automated, can be done once and then repeated again and again when the content is going to be the same each time. And in recruitment, the processes that are repeated each time can be automated, and you would add in the human element as and when required to make sure that that it wasn't going completely awry. So it's not just call centres and factory shop floors that are being automated. Processes where there's repeated tasks being done on a regular basis.
Well, there's a great example. There was a survey done, and I forget who ran it, so my apologies for not crediting whoever it was that ran it. There was a survey done of accountancy grads in the UK this year, so those that had graduated this year, and 75% of the grads that were surveyed, and I believe there are about 3,000 in the survey, said that they believe that their job would come under threat within 5 years and actually was likely to not exist. Look, accountancy is obviously under threat. Call centres are under threat. I mean, I've spoken to people at IBM about Watson, and Watson is incredible. If you've ever spoken to Watson, it's just amazing. And you look at what Watson can do for a call centre. They're talking about 300 different possible scenarios that you could put into one computer program. It could take the jobs of several hundred people, and per minute, it can handle 30,000 calls. Why do you need people in a call center? You don't. Anybody who works in a bank, they don't need to work there anymore. Arguably the Bank of England is actually redundant because financial modelling means that there's no point in employing people. You can have Mark Carney there as a figurehead, but there shouldn't be anybody working there because statistical modelling is something you can already do.
I think about the number of people in the UK who are working in call centres right now, and the call centres have replaced the factories of the past as jobs that middling educated kids could go into, and it was a relatively safe, although not fabulously paid job. Yeah,
and you look at other industries around the world. You look at mining in Australia. It's something like 70% of people working in mining drive trucks. Well, if they crash a truck, and they do quite frequently due to fatigue and also mental illness due to the amount of time that they're spending underground, spending 12 hours a day in the dark is not good for you. But mines are a one-way system. You crash a mining truck and it costs you about $1 million an hour. Well, GE have already released their automated trucks. So those 70% of the people working in the mining industry will probably not have a job in not 5 years, probably in 2 years, because GE has rolled that out. So that's, when you think that these guys are earning hundreds of thousands of dollars and they impact their local economies incredibly, that has large social impact. And, it leaves the, I don't want to be unkind here, but the relatively unskilled people that have gone out there and done that job, it's trust me, driving a truck day in, day out is a mind-numbing job, and all credit to people who can do it for long term, particularly for 12 hours underground. But if you can automate that, it's gone. Driving jobs are gone. And I've been to an automated McDonald's, and there were 2 people there. They cleared tables. That was it. A machine cooked your food. And McDonald's in the US, okay, so there's some issues around it, but the $15 minimum wage that I think 3 states are proposing, and all the others that have said it, I think there's in total 12 states that have said they want an $15 minimum wage. McDonald's turned around and said, well, this is the catalyst for us to now get rid of servers. So they will have no servers in McDonald's, I think, by the end of 2018. So
that becomes the base figure in their calculations on, well, how much does it cost to have automation?
Exactly. They've looked at what does the line look like? Well, the line for budget on automation is much lower than our gross bills. Plus, if we're going to go to a $15 minimum wage, we've got to do healthcare, and we've got to do this, we've got to do that. Let's just automate it. And so, I think the next level of that, is twofold actually. And the one that I think you touched on, those processes that are very driven by it is just process within recruitment. They're going to go. They will go really, really, really quickly. And there's a lot of stuff around. There's Maya, there's Tara, there's Viv. If you've spoken to any of them as pieces of automation kit, they're very good. Two of them are saying they want to eradicate 75% of the admin from recruitment. Other people are doing it. We know that it's happening. You look at companies like List, Matt Buckland's done great things with automated tools. He's got it down to a very small recruitment team, but he's also got rid of HR because he realized that most of HR is administration and form filling. Sorry to any HR people that are listening. But, I've said for a long time that I genuinely believe that HR is probably one of the most under threat industry sectors that we work with on a regular basis, because there is a vast amount of stuff that's done by anybody who is either learning to be qualified or very early on in their qualification process that is administration. And what we'll see is actually those people in HR that have got a mid-tier or senior job pushing themselves further and further up the chain, and the gap between those new people coming into the industry and those people that have been in it for a long time gets bigger. And technology is going to fill that gap, and there will be less and less people wanting to enter that industry, and that's true in a lot of places.
I'll give you an example of bunching up that I saw in recent times when the recession hit in 2008, 2009. Certainly in Scotland now, I would imagine in the rest of the UK, literally thousands of property lawyers found they had no work to do, none at all. So as quick as they could, they would retrain in doing some other kind of law within the firms that they were in. But what that meant was that instantly no trainees were being recruited. There was no work for trainees to come in and work their way through the system. So it meant that there was a huge bump in the road. So anyone who had gone through school and university always thinking, well, I'm the cleverest guy in the class, I'm going to get a job as a lawyer, they come out and there's nothing for them. Which brings me to my point. If we're going to see deserted, not mining village, but call centre villages, if Slough is going to be completely desolate and empty in future, what can people do to make sure that they're trained up in a way to avoid the chop that comes with AI on their jobs?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Let's face it. Any new technology creates new jobs, but they just create jobs that are unexpected. And being able to predict your way around that, if I could do that, I'd be making a lot more money than I am right now. But I think if you take the example of the mining trucks and the automation of mining trucks, well, someone's got to keep those trucks on the road, and somebody's got to learn to program the computers. And if a new mine gets built, you've got to reprogram it to go different directions. So you're going to lose some jobs, absolutely. And there was a stat that I saw. It was something like 40% of jobs would be lost to automation in Australia in something like 10 years. However, the aging population meant that 60% of jobs that were currently going to be filled by the older generation would then be unfilled. So you've then got a 20% gap of people that they still need on top of the people that are already in the population. So it's once you start looking at kind of macroeconomics and you start looking at things like migration trends, and you start looking at generational trends and things like that, there's some really interesting stuff that goes on. That's a far bigger conversation than we're having right now.
But not quite as depressing as you might think.
No, not at all.
Okay, should we move on to something it's completely different? Well, about technology. Facebook workplaces. So that's something which has been mentioned as one of the bigger game changers of 2016. And I think that we probably agree it's interesting. Do either of you want to talk about it?
It's interesting. Matt, I'm sure, will know more than me, but from what I can see, it's essentially Facebook within an organization. So it's a customized Facebook page where you've got communications between employees of a company who can collaborate on work, which will compete with lots of the other external tools for collaboration, like God, I'm forgetting the name, Trello and lots of the others. So I can imagine that having an effect there, but in terms of recruitment and employment, I'm not so sure.
I think they're interesting. Actually, Facebook's probably the most interesting player at the moment because it's actually got a product. There's a lot of other stuff that's around that we all kind of talk about, and the elephant in the room is always there. The is Google going to do something? Well, we hear every 3 months that Google's going to do something, and it invariably doesn't. They released an API. Exciting.
Well, the bigger threat for Facebook is the jobs tab, that you can now add jobs onto employers' pages.
Look, I think Facebook has some really compelling stuff. I think they, let's face it, they own the market. Much as I may find Facebook this insidious, horrible place that I really don't like to be involved in, I am involved in it because, frankly, I live in the world. And you can't get away from it. We all can't get away from Facebook to an extent until some sort of James Herbert-esque Butlerian jihad happens and we all reject technology. But that's, again, another conversation. Look, I think Facebook are compelling because they've got a product. They know programmatic marketing and they know programmatic buying. They are a big player in that market space. Anybody who's a good recruiter who hasn't been using Facebook advertising is not a good recruiter. Because, I was doing this 5 years ago at G4S, and it made a massive impact on our ability to hire the specific people we wanted. If you want to go after somebody and you know that you want a guy who's within 4 roads of where you're actually recruiting for, and you want him to fit into the team, and you can put the team profile in there, you can get that guy. I used to narrow recruitment advertising down to 10 to 15 people that I was targeting because I wanted those 10 to 15 people. I think Matt Buckland's got a great story about a guy who was a developer he wanted to hire, and he actually set up an ad because he knew it was just going to be served to him that said, "Hello, Martin." And that's great, and good recruiters should be doing that. So the case study is there that Facebook is very good at what it does. It's part of a media mix. Is it a recruitment platform? I don't think it is yet. It's a great workplace platform. We indeed use Facebook Workplace as a comms tool internally. It's great for that.
I tell you what has happened in the past year. In the past year, I know it happened to an extent before, but in the past year, the switch has been flipped on people connecting with colleagues and business people on Facebook, when before they would be adamant, I'm only connecting to friends and family, and they've now, the seal has been broken. So all of that's happening. So the problem that was tried to be resolved or fixed by Monsters Be Known, or what was the other one, the branch out, where effectively it was on Facebook, but it was a separate layer of contacts. So that separate layer of contacts was for that purpose. Now, Workplace may well have separate layers of contacts, but it's not going to work in that way. But now people are not differentiating in the same way, and you can separate. You can have lists of people that are, a bit like Google Circles. You can have people who are close, people who are in this group or that group or the other. So if you're posting something, it will only be seen by those that you specify. That said, Facebook still changes permissions on a regular basis. So whatever you've set up in the past, pay attention, because it's all going to change tomorrow.
And that's the inherent problem that I think people have with Facebook is, the kind of lack of control, or the lack of understanding what their roadmap is. They tend to spring things on people, and we're all cautious, cynical people in our industry, so we don't like surprises. I think it's, at the moment, it's quite compelling as a workplace management tool. It's quite compelling as a comms tool. I'd love to see where it's going to be in a couple of years' time, because I don't think it's compelling enough at the moment to be something we can all start saying, yeah, the world has changed, and Facebook is going to be everything. And particularly when you think, we all know that Facebook edits what you see and what you don't see. That's a very prevalent thing in the current zeitgeist. But when we think of that in the frame of reference of work, then is it a question of me as a recruiter, if I have more influence because I'm XYZ world's largest company and I spend lots of money with Facebook and I want to recruit people, do I then get exclusivity in seeing people? And we should always be conscious that people treat Facebook like it's some glorious free tool and some piece of social good. It's a commercial entity that's trying to make money. And you should always be wary of the fact that if you're not paying them, you're the product, and you can always be sold or sold to. And that's an interesting thing when it starts talking about recruitment, because we want to be egalitarian and we want to be free. We want to give everybody the opportunity to find work. I'm not sure whether my personal view of Facebook agrees with them doing that. Anyway, that's probably, again, a much larger conversation.
I think you're right to be cynical, but I think you're more cynical than me on it. People often say to me, "Oh, you put an awful lot of stuff on Facebook," and I do. But I'm sitting at a computer all day. It's bound to happen. But I am conscious that whatever I put on Facebook, that's the price I'm paying for Facebook. I'm adding to their content. I might not be paying them any cash dollars, but I'm putting on stuff that makes activity, that makes things, makes a network, and that's to the benefit of Facebook. I get a bit of benefit from it, but in the bigger picture, that's where Facebook are making the money.
And do you know what you're worth to Facebook? Do you know the actual dollar amount?
Oh, go on. Go on.
You're worth precisely $12.
Me particularly?
Everybody is worth about $12. There's very little variance between one person and another, but if you post stuff onto Facebook, that's your lifetime on Facebook is worth $12.
That's a fab statistic. I like that. Right, I was going to mention some things that we don't want to talk about, but which people have said. So these are the things I've seen in the 2016 going to 2017. Things are important. And the one which I find really frustrating is employer branding, employer value proposition. I don't really understand why we're still talking about it. I know you think you feel more the same way, don't you, Matt?
Yeah. My God, this is still, how is this still a thing? I started working in recruitment 20 years ago, and it was the thing then. 20 years later, it's still the thing. How have you not got this? How do people in recruitment and HR not have this nailed? Is it, I don't want to be disparaging of ad agencies, but is it ad agencies haven't really given them the product they asked for? I don't know. Is it that nobody actually stays in their job long enough to see a project through to its final iteration? Probably that's quite likely. Is it really that we just don't really understand what people want from companies? I think that's probably one of the biggest issues here. The notion of EVP, all credit to Bill Borman, puppies die when people say that. I'm sorry, it's just ridiculous. The idea that you can turn around and say, well, everybody who comes to our company is going to believe X is ridiculous. Look, I have a very strong belief on what I think people want when they go and find a job. And there's a huge amount of data to back this up, so I'm pleased that I'm not just talking about things that I've grabbed from the air. People want to have, we touched on flexibility earlier, that's a big thing. But people want to do meaningful work, and they want to work in a team. Now, those two things are the things that count. You want to get paid, you want to feel valued, you want some flexibility, but you want to do something meaningful. You want to do a project that you understand and that has an outcome, and you want to work with good people. Now, you could be working for a trash compacting company, but if the project's great, it doesn't matter. It could be a trash compacting company or Google. If the job's rubbish and the project's rubbish, you aren't going to go and work at Google. You'll go and work for the trash compacting company. The way that you articulate that and this idea of EVP, I actually think there's maybe team VP, because there's a value proposition to the people you work with. We all arguably stay in jobs because we like the people we work with. I've never, ever looked at a company mission statement and gone, well, that's the reason I'm going to join that company. I've met people that I've liked and I've gone, yeah, I think we could do some cool stuff here. That's why I take jobs.
On that topic, though, I would say that people now are much more sensitive to working in a place where they don't agree with the environment, the culture, the ethos of the company. They feel more tied into or tuned into their own sensibilities of what's right and wrong in a company that would suit them. Where in the past, you work for who you work for, and it would never even come up that you would agree with what the company was perceived as out with the organisation. So people now, it'll stick in their craw to work in an organisation that is seen as, against the environment or bad for this, or has had something embarrassing happen to it. So I think people are much more sensitive to that, and people leave jobs all the time. They leave companies all the time for lower salaries, but a better environment. One that suits them more. One thing that we might get on to in a bit is people leave for a job that's nearer to home. They don't need to do the 2-hour commute. Oh. They want to have much more of a balance, and they know, frankly, that in a world where it's quite likely that they'll be changing jobs on a more frequent basis, they don't need to. They don't need to hang around in a company or that they're not tuned into for any longer than they absolutely have to. Also, bearing in mind that the world of work is entirely different in London and South East to the rest of the UK, where you can chop and change jobs pretty much every week if you really had a mind to, but in the rest of the country, not so much.
Yeah, I think we wind up in that commuting culture down here as well, which really, to my mind, it beggars belief. I'm just 10, 15 miles outside of Brighton. Everybody I know commutes into London. I could go on a very long rant about Southern Rail's complete inability to manage trains, but that's again another very long discussion. Look, we have this weird acceptance that we're going to commute into work. Oddly, when you look at the motivations behind people wanting to change jobs and what gets them to accept or reject a job, you're quite right going back to your thing about company reputation. It influences your decision to accept or reject a job. Absolutely. It's about 43% of people say it does. But the top two things that people always look for are pay and compensation. That's number one, always will be. Anybody who tells you that it isn't is wrong, because there's huge amounts of data that backs that up. The second thing is my travel.
Yeah.
So that's just code for commute. That's all it is.
And is the pay and compensation enough to pay for the travel?
Exactly. Every time I've ever taken a job that requires me to commute, what I do, and I'm quite cynical in this respect, is I work out how long it's going to take me to commute.
Yeah.
And I work out whether the job that I'm going to take that requires me to commute pays me enough over and above what I would have got locally to not only compensate me for the commute, but give me a little bit extra on top of that. Because you have to do that calculation. If you don't do that calculation, then you're not thinking about work in the right way. I think it's very interesting that I worked for a company very local to me for a long time. Thoroughly enjoyed my time doing it, and I see the people that I used to work with that now commute up to London, and they don't have the free time they used to. They don't feel they have the flexibility they used to. Their lives have changed pretty radically. My life changed pretty radically as a result of having to commute. I think it's an odd, very peculiarly British thing to do, commuting quite as much as we do.
I've never commuted more than 2 miles for work. And my office now, my house is about a mile that way. So I can walk in rain or shine, and I've never done that commuting. But when people are looking at jobs now, you'll know much more than me, Matt, being down in that neck of the woods. Is it really seen as normal to have a job where you're traveling 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get home?
It didn't used to be. I mean, my commute to Farringdon many years ago when I first worked up in Farringdon, it used to take me 52 minutes. Now my average commute, as a result of the southern issues and things like that, I've been looking at it over the last sort of 12 months where I do go into London. I'm fortunate that I don't have to go in every day, but my average is 2.25 hours.
Yeah.
It's frankly unacceptable. And I have really, really good friends who work on the same rail line, and they're saying exactly the same thing. And they're actually saying, well, look, if this continues, I have to consider going and getting another job because my boss isn't going to put up with it anymore, and I can't commute for 2 hours a day.
Would you say it would be reasonable for an employer in London to say, well, I'm not going to hire anyone who is absolutely reliant on the trains because I know the trains can go off, and frankly, I need people to be here. Is it crazy for an employer to hire someone living in Brighton to work in London when, or is it the case that there's no one else in London neither that's more reliable to do the job? Are they trading off on skills and distance for the chance that someone won't be in several days a year?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of that. There's a lot of very, very skilled people who, decided they no longer wanted to go and live and work in London. We all mutually know people that made that decision, and said, I'm not doing it anymore. So, I look at the talent pool near me. Brighton's a bit of a microcosm. There's a lot of very, digital media-y types down in Brighton. It kind of attracts that sort of person. And a lot of them came down to go and work for Brighton agencies. And as their careers progressed, they have to go back up to London. And you look at where our mutual friend Jamie Leonard lives over in Whitstable. It's got a similar kind of profile of people. Yeah. I think it becomes one of those weird things, and you're right. Employers have to question it. What skills am I getting? Do I get enough for my money to have somebody commute in? And is that person going to be reliable? Is there an element of their job that they don't have to be in the office? If the answer is yes, then why are they in the office in the first place?
Going back to what we were talking about AI, there will be a line beyond which cost-wise the cost of automation is cheaper than having people on pretty chunky salaries, commuting 2 hours, not always being able to get into the office, and an employer says, we've gone past that line, let's automate now. So that the decision making is being stands.
It's even that, or they go on to Upwork and find somebody in the Philippines who can do it even cheaper.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we've done 40 minutes. I think we've only got one topic left. So you both know what the potential topics are. If you want to think about what you want to talk about, the things which also were mentioned, which I definitely don't want to talk about, were the Uberization of recruitment, which makes me want to poke myself in the eye. Doing the phrase "the CV is dead," which continues to be said, and the war for talent, which I honestly thought 3 years ago people realised was not a phrase we should be uttering, but we still do. Well, I don't, but people still do. So there was a few other topics. I mean, Brexit, perhaps we will talk about that next year and we start to see the full impact. But was there another topic on that list that either of you want to cover off? I think you were both equally happy with them all.
I wasn't thinking about talking about it, just as you said, the CV is dead. I know it's been talked about for forever, but I think the CV is becoming irrelevant where there are so many more metrics being used to identify and screen candidates before they're even seen. So candidates are being put through the sausage machine, where the CV may well be getting parsed and so on, but there are lots of other parts of their background that are more relevant. Or psychometric assessment of individuals, where if you're recruiting for a call center or for retail, then where they've worked and how long they've worked there in the past is not so relevant because you're going to train them in the way that you do things. So if Asda are hiring 200 people to work in their new store in Basingstoke, then their CV is almost entirely irrelevant because they're looking for people who will relate with their customers in their way. And if they find people with the right personality, they can train the rest.
I know what you're saying, but I could be wrong, but I bet that Asda and Basingstoke are still asking candidates to send in CVs.
I bet they are, but I don't think they need it. They need to.
No.
I think you raised an interesting point about kind of pre-screening and understanding candidate skills. And if you look at the world of tech, you look at the people that were getting jobs for a long time were those that had a university degree and had this and had that. There's more and more of an acceptance of the fact that that doesn't have to be the fact. You can actually spend some time in your bedroom learning to code and be incredibly good at what you do. And I don't want to turn this into an Indeed Prime advertorial by any stretch of the imagination.
I was just going to mention Indeed Prime. Yeah.
Talk about it.
It's essentially that's what Indeed Prime does. Prime's other products are available. but Prime is an example of a trend that we are seeing, that some companies are actually starting to look at this and say, look, what does talent really look like? And Indeed is by no means the first company to do coding challenges and things like that, to allow people to understand what talent truly looks like. I think it's a much more relevant way of actually looking at talent, because it allows you to understand what the person can do, not what they've done.
On the surface, I would say that Indeed Prime is a means of taking the cream off of the candidates available out there, and having them in a separate box, so that employers can look through those, and they're being assessed, they're being screened, and they're being scored according to various metrics. Yeah. One of the other interesting things was that it appears that Indeed Prime are also screening employers. So when they say we've only got the best employers, we look at the employer's financials or their stability and so on and so on. So that information is available to candidates. And I wouldn't say I'm a candidate champion, but I'm always looking at ways in which candidates can assert themselves. In all of the technology that there is in the marketplace, it's almost always the case that the tech is being built for the benefit of the employer, so that they can move all the pieces around on the board according to them. But very rarely is it the case that the candidate is able to push back and say, well, we're not tolerating this. We won't have that. We're certainly not going to cooperate with you on this. And I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, no, it is honestly one of the fundamental reasons why I actually joined Indeed. Is that if you go to an Indeed office, or you walk around our Austin campus or anything else, people do actually wear the T-shirt that says "I help people get jobs," because fundamentally that's what we do. And if you look at every decision they make in Austin from a tech and product perspective, it's not the customer. Obviously, it's a revenue generating organisation with shareholders and things like that. But the decisions made by Chris Hyams, who was our head of product, now our CEO, are all based on, is this a good candidate experience? And I've just spent a week in New York just talking about what does good candidate experience look like? What does that mean for an employer? And how do we connect the candidate experience to the employer experience? Because if the candidate comes first, well, they get to choose the right job, they get to choose the right company, and it's good to see that's becoming more the narrative. It's not just Indeed's narrative, it's other people's narrative as well, because as talent pools get smaller and smaller and smaller, you have to do better by the candidate. Otherwise the candidate is going to turn around and say, well, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, you won't be surprised to learn I had a bit of a contretemps on Facebook earlier with some Americans, and it was a post that had been started by Brian Cheney about recruitment in general, but essentially quite a few of the American recruiters were coming on and saying, well, I really love to help candidates. I want to help people achieve their goals in life, and so on and so on and so on. And I'm thinking, hold on a second, this sounds too much like a social worker to me. Your primary role as a recruitment consultant working for an agency be different working for an employer, but a different spin on it. But it's to achieve your goals, which is to fill vacancies for your clients that are paying you for your time and effort, not to cater for candidates. It's always the case when you're working as a recruitment consultant, your granny or your aunt or your brother-in-law gives you a call and said, I hear that you help people to find jobs. No, that's not really what we're here for. And if you get a buzz out of inadvertently placing a good guy in a great job, and you get a buzz out of that, that's fantastic. Yeah. But to go to work on a Monday morning thinking, I'm doing good in the world, that's not what you're there for. And the good is fine, but the good can't be the first thing in the morning. Now, if we were aiming towards the good, that's great. And if there were companies like Indeed who are saying, well, frankly, we see that as commercially the best decision to have. If we make all or most of our decisions from a candidate's perspective, we can't go too far wrong. I absolutely back that 100%, and I'm all for the candidates having as much clout as possible in the marketplace to assert themselves. But for recruitment consultants to say, well, I really want to help people, it made me laugh.
It doesn't ring entirely true, does it?
No.
That's not a very positive note to end upon, Stephen. But I'm sure.
But I love recruiters, and I think recruiters can do amazing things. But giving you a hug is not one of them.
No, let's be honest about what we're here for.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Now, normally our shows are only 20 to 30 minutes. We've done 50 minutes. We've still got topics we didn't cover. I am going to blog about this and put links into some of the other things. Matt, I'd love to have you back next year. Only 2 weeks away. To do a chat. The thing which I am hoping for 2017 is a better platform upon which to do our live chats. Because whilst this is fine, it was not as exciting as Blab. I much preferred Blab. If they could bring that back, that would make me happy.
Yeah.
But no, thank you ever so much, Matt and Stephen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.